Welcome back to the last video, the 11th video in my 11-part series talking about upzoning. I hope you learned something. I hope you got a lot of knowledge to empower yourself when your city, if and when your city decides to push an upzone. Hopefully they don't do that, but at least you'll know better if they do. In this video, I'm going to share with you 10 takeaways from all of the articles, kind of, consolidate all the information and knowledge from these articles. And without further ado, let's jump right in. Takeaway number one is that property taxes will most likely go up, right? And that is because when your land now has more value because you can do more things to that land, generally that's going to flow into your property taxes. Now, I know that cities often say that your property is taxed at the use that you are using it for now. And they say, even if we upzone you, your property taxes aren't going to go up. Of course, they're going to say that, right? Why would they not? In my experience, I don't have a lot of trust for what governments tell me because on the local, state, and national level, historically, they always just lie and then change things down the road. This is why it's very dangerous to give your government any foothold into the freedom that you have now, because governments historically go back and revise things and change things, and they don't really even bat an eye to this. This is just the way that it is. I mean, any rational person who's paying attention, they know this is happening. They've seen it happen with their own eyes. You don't want to give them you don't want to give them an inch because they'll take a mile. So for one, I don't trust them. And plus, in a number of places in the articles, people did say your property taxes are going to go up if there's an upzone. And the other factor in play here is this. Just because they may not initially tax your property at what you could be doing with it, they may adhere to if your government is saying this, I've heard it proposed, they may adhere to leaving your property taxes based on what you're using your property for now. That doesn't account for all of the potential changes in your neighborhood and the amenities that arrive in your neighborhood that do influence your property taxes. My point is this: governments are going to find any way possible to get more money out of you. And while we're on the topic, upzoning in and of itself is the ultimate way currently right now to get more money out of you. Like, that's what upzoning is. Make no mistake about it. They're not doing this to increase the housing supply for people. Just like you and I, governments are first and foremost interested in self-preservation, right? They're doing it for themselves and their partners in crime, so to speak, developers and private equity. They're going to take care of themselves first, but in order to do that, they have to pull the rich man's trick. And the rich man's trick is to bundle it and package it in a way that fools, right? Tricks fool people, that fools the majority of people into believing that my government cares about me. My government's looking out for me, or my government cares about my child or my future generations. Sadly, people still believe that in our world. It's hard to believe, but they do. I mean, this is what happens when you have an education system that is really more about indoctrination. Well, one, dumbing us down, right? Look into I think it was the title of his book. I want to say John Gotti. That might not be the right name. John Taylor, someone, but also that other gal, she exposed the education system. I can't think of her name right now. Catherine, maybe. You could probably find it. But the education system, to the person who is studying it, is designed to dumb us down so that it's easier to pull these kind of tricks on us. I mean, that may ruffle some feathers. And I want to be really clear. I'm not talking about super badass teachers, because remember, the situation we find ourselves in is a mixture of truth and lies, right? There are awesome teachers out there doing good work, but the overall system is not designed to make you the smartest person you can be. It's designed to lower your IQ, lower your intelligence, and keep it low, because it's easier to put one over on a dumb person than it is a smart person. So sorry to go off on the tangent, but let's just get that out of the way. Your property taxes are probably going to go up if there's an upzone. That's what I'm saying. Number 2, you will lose diversity and ethnicity, and racial neighborhoods may be destroyed in an upzone, even though they will tell you, hey, we're doing this for all of those reasons, to help those reasons. But generally, it's always the opposite of what's going to happen, right? One of the articles in here called it the exploitation and homogenization of neighborhoods. And that's what will happen. A couple of the articles said that neighborhoods became whiter, wealthier, and more crowded than ever, right? It's called gentrification, and it is a real thing, and it is really attached to upzones. It legit happens. You're going to lose potential cool little ethnic diverse aspects of your neighborhood, whether they're, restaurants and shops and stores like that. Those could probably go away. You're going to lose the people who work at and run those shops. They're probably going to go away. It is the exploitation and homogenization of your neighborhood. That is number 2. Point number 2. Point number 3 is upzones inherently remove you from the decision-making process of what goes on and what gets built in your neighborhood. They remove you and your neighbors from the planning process. Now, here again is a double-edged sword, right? The city, again, unfortunately, may upzone your property and say you can now do all these cool things on your property. But guess what? So can your neighbor. And guess what? Even more. So can an out-of-state developer who doesn't even live in your neighborhood, either out of state or out of neighborhood or out of city, who doesn't even live in your neighborhood, now has the right by law to do a lot more stuff with that property. Do you feel comfortable giving up that right? I don't. I don't feel comfortable giving up any of my rights, any of my freedoms, because I know that once those rights and freedoms are gone, they never come back. Governments never give them back. Why would they? Again, in the game of life in the United States and all governments, they're always trying to take from us, and we're always trying to get more. That's the war that we're in. And if you allow your city to upzone, you just allowed them to move the line further toward, your freedom. You just allowed them to take more of your freedom and more of your rights as a owner or a renter in your town, right? As a citizen of the town. Because make no mistake about it, underlying an upzone is this. The city wants to streamline the process of how the built environment comes into existence. And that means removing you and I from the process, because we're speed bumps to them, right? If we're out of the way, they can work one-on-one with developers and streamline the process, and it will become a total shit show real fast. So I'm not into giving up any of my rights or freedoms or my voice in the decision-making, the planning, decision-making process of what gets built in my neighborhood. No how, no way. So if an upzone goes through, you'll be moved out of the process pretty darn quick. Number 4 is this. A lot of people talk about, and this is an example of ignorance, and I use that word in just a holistic, loving way. It's an example of ignorance of people who haven't actually dug in and studied what's actually happened. Because here's the great ruse. Upzoning has been happening for decades. It's not hard to find out exactly what upzoning will do to your city. What I see in my city that is proposing this is there's a lot of people who clearly haven't done the research, who haven't done a simple Google search or maybe 2, because if they had, they would find that it is not in their best interest, and it's not in the best interest of their children and grandchildren either. A lot of people say, I want more housing choices for my children so they can stay here. Well, you haven't done the research, my friend, because if you did, you would know that upzoning generally always drives housing costs up. So why would you want to do that to your children? It's already shitty. Why would you want to make it worse? But what I want to say here is, and I'm going to read the article from the quote from Patrick Condon, which was let's see, video number 8. You can go back and look at that one. It was a short video. Let me state the point of number 4 here is it's not a supply issue. Like, you can't solve the affordability crisis with adding more supply, because that's not the primary driving factor. The primary driving factor, as Patrick Condon said, and I'm going to read this to you in a moment, is the land value. How many people want to move to your city? How popular is your city? If your city's a pretty baller place to live, that means that the land value is going to be really high. That is a supply and demand thing. They're not making any more land. So land is only going to be going up, right? If you live in a place where no one wants to live, land value is pretty low. But listen to what he said. We have incrementally quadrupled. By the way, he said this at, if you recall from video number 8, at the Livable California teleconference, February 6th, 2021. He said, we have incrementally, and I'm quoting, we have incrementally quadrupled the density of Vancouver, but we haven't seen any decrease in per square foot costs. The evidence is indisputable. We can conclude there is a problem beyond restrictive zoning. No amount of opening zoning or allowing for development will cause prices to go down. We've seen no evidence of that at all. It's not the NIMBYs that are the problem. It's the global increase in land value in urban areas that is the problem. So when your government comes to you and tries to lie to you and say, hey, if we just increase the supply of housing, that'll make the housing costs go down, show them Patrick Condon's statement, and they will probably recapitulate. Number 5, this is also a sucky one, and maybe you've seen it in your own neighborhood happening. I've seen it firsthand in my own neighborhood. If you increase the allowable use of land, if you increase density on a piece of property, meaning going up and out to the sides toward your property line, guess what you're going to lose? You're going to lose green spaces. And guess what else you're going to lose? You're going to lose mature trees. Because if you're going up and out, you don't have room on your property for a tree, right? And so cities will become cold, heartless places. Concrete jungles, if you will. That's not cool, right? That's reason number 5 that I pulled from this. Number 6, this came up a bunch too. Upzoning by itself won't solve the problem, but cities go, the government is notorious for pulling one lever and thinking or promising us that it'll solve all the problems. It never does. They're simplistic in their thinking. And the reason for that is they're not actually looking to solve the problem they say they're going to solve. Doubling back to what I said earlier, they're not in the game of helping you out. They're in the game of helping themselves out, increasing revenue for the government, and also helping out their friends in the development community, developers, and also private equity, Wall Street bankers. That's who they're interested in helping out. Notice I didn't mention you in there. Sorry to say this, but you're the mark, right? As in, you're the target. You are the person they are exploiting to help all 3 of those people. I know that might be a tough pill for you to swallow, but it's time that you hear it. You're not on the list. Them promising you, and this is one thing that I can't even believe people, again, people aren't thinking it through. If you are willing to trade the convenience of having a coffee shop or a bookstore or a bar on the corner so you could easily walk or ride your bike there, or you are willing to trade the promise, and it's many times a false promise, of being able to ride your bike to grocery stores or venues around, for all of the negative things that are going to come from an upzone, right? Wider, wealthier neighborhoods, gentrification, loss of mature trees, more crowded, you stack them and pack them, higher property taxes, that's a big one, higher cost of living in general, that's another big one. If you're willing to trade all of those things for a coffee shop on the corner, I don't know what to tell you, right? But upzoning by itself is not going to solve the problem. It's asking too much of zoning, right? The problem is complex, and your government's not going to tell you that because they really don't care about solving the problem, quite frankly. That's my experience. Number 7, upzoning will put extra pressure on your infrastructure in your city. I'm talking about your sewer and water, and I'm also talking about your emergency services, fire and ambulance and police. When you add density, this is why cities, especially inner cities, are a total and complete shit show. No one wants to live there because the infrastructure is so taxed that it's just a shit show. It's hilarious that Mayor Adams in New York is promoting drinking the tap water. You've probably seen these commercials. That is a complete and utter joke. Any sane, rational person knows that there is all sorts of weird and heinous shit in tap water. I'm sorry, but it is. Look up the studies. The studies and the data is out there. For him to say that to people and try to make us believe that he actually drinks that is hilarious. So infrastructure will be taxed, and in many cases it is not built or was not built to support the demand that an upzone would bring upon it. Number 8, I got to read this to you. I got to read this to you because this is from video number 5. I want to read this to you because this is another hilarious argument here. So number 8 is this. There are some people that want to not make housing an investment vehicle. They want to remove the wealth creation aspect of housing. That's fine as long as you remove it for everybody. And by everybody, I mean Wall Street, private equity, Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street. You remove it from all of those people first, and I might give it some thought. Listen to what this person has the nerve to say. This is, again, the height of ignorance. We have got to decommodify housing, Fife says. I'm reading this from video number 5. It was the longer video. Very last paragraph. We have got to decommodify housing, Fife says. We've got to take the profit motive out of essential needs. That's the biggest fight. We need to figure out other ways for investors to make money that don't rely on the things that people need to survive. We shouldn't be able to commodify air, water, and housing. Make money off Jordans, not housing. Again, I will give it some consideration when you take the big boys and girls out of the game. Then I'll give it some consideration. And I know that'll never happen because, again, that's not the game they're in. Housing, you probably are aware of this. Big investment companies, institutional investors have been going heavy into the private housing sector for years, competing with you and I, first-time home buyers, young people, young couples, young families, competing with us to buy single-family homes. That's how bad they want it now. Historically, institutional investors, private equity, don't want to mess with single-family homes because the profit margins aren't there. They want a large apartment complex. But because a lot of those have already been gobbled up, and since the machine, and you probably heard of this, Aladdin that runs BlackRock, which is an AI machine, that machine has already gobbled up all the low-hanging fruit. Now it's going to the second and third and fourth tier because it doesn't make a lot of sense for a large trillion-dollar private equity firm or institutional investment firm to go after single-family houses unless there's nothing left in the market to gobble up. So that's where we're at now. The snake is fully eating itself. That's where we're at. Governments and those 3 entities, developers, private equity, and governments, are working together to sack middle America even harder. Sack single-family homes even harder. Because once they've acquired those single-family homes and upzoned those into triplexes or fourplexes, or maybe even combined large swaths of property to make a mega complex, it's never going back to you and I. It's always going to stay up. And it's going to lock out any future generations from accumulating the wealth that they could have created from owning property. Remember, owning property is a baller, badass way historically to accrue wealth, right? You don't want to give that up. You do not want to give up that. Okay. That is number 8. We're on number 9 now. Upzoning increases investor activity and real estate speculation in the market. And guess what that does? That drives prices up for you and I, because speculators and real estate investors, they're in the game of maximizing their profits. And so when they come in and get active in your market, you are going to pay for it if you're in the housing market, or your children are going to pay for it if they're in the housing market. The best thing is you don't want those people in mass in the housing market at all. It's going to be a total shit show because prices of everything are going to be driven up. Number 10, and lastly, and I'm glad I'm closing with this one because it is huge. All this stuff about upzoning ultimately enriches the upper 1%. And the reason for that is money always flows up. It generally doesn't flow down. If it flows down, it's flowing down in order to multiply itself for when it goes back up. What I mean by that is private equity is going to invest in property at the lowest end so that they can flip it and turn it and extract value from it at the highest, and it's going to go back up. It's the whole, what they're doing, they're putting the money to work for them, and it multiplies and comes back to them like a boomerang. Send in $1, you get out $2. That's how it works. So all this goes up to the upper 1% ultimately, again, and that strips the value, it strips the wealth from the lower and middle class and sends it upstream. And guess what? Once it goes upstream, it never comes back unless it's coming back to multiply itself to go pull $2 back again. Wake up. Please wake up. Do your research. In my mind, looking out in the world, we're right at the brink of a total and complete shit show. We just came off 3 years of the same thing happening. The same thing just happened, and some people still aren't seeing it. Governments worked with private corporations and global bankers, global folks, in order to extract and extort money from the lower and middle class in the form of tax revenue in this case, right? Tax in the form of taxes, up to the elite. How many new billionaires were created in the last number of years? How many of those are in the pharmaceutical sector? Look into it. My point is this: we don't really have a lot more in us. A couple more sacks like this, and we're pretty much done. We're going to be done. People are already struggling. I look at it as a continuum, right? Wherever you are on the continuum, maybe you're making good money, living in a good, nice home, but someone down here, maybe they're making minimum wage, barely hanging on. When the tide rises of the shit show, they're going to be underwater, and the tide is continually rising. If you talk to people in the housing, in the like housing market where people are getting kicked out of their housing, a lot of those people were pretty safe a couple years ago. All it takes is a hop, skip, and a jump, a couple of misfortunate things to happen, and you're in deep trouble. So we don't want the water level to rise on anyone ultimately, but we certainly don't want it to want to facilitate it and help it to rise. So there's the 10 takeaways. I hope you enjoyed this series. This is my contribution to help in the battle for cities trying to upzone their neighborhoods. It's no bueno. So, that's it. Thank you for watching. I do appreciate you. And until next time, I wish you all the best health, wealth, and success. Bye-bye.